How's it going out there, YouTube? My name is Jesse, and I am the curator for the Golden Age.
This is Lost Heroes of the Golden Age.
Why are you getting so far ahead of me?
This is one of my favorite Golden Age characters.
Really? I didn't know that this was one of your favorite stories.
The Boy King and His Giant is my favorite story set, next to Jungle Girls, of course.
You're a fan of the Boy King, I take it?
I'm a fan of the Giant.
Why are you such a fan of the Giant?
He's picking up and destroying subs and battleships and wrestles a giant mechanical T-Rex.
Yeah, it's really disappointing that was probably one of the last best things that he did.
What do you mean?
After the giant T-Rex battle, it became more the Boy King and less the Giant. I mean, he started showing up less and less in the comic books after that. In fact, in the very last issue, which was number 9, the Giant showed up for one panel.
One?
Yes, just one panel where he grabbed a mechanical man.
What are you even talking about?
Well, what happened was, I don't know. The fact that the Giant was doing stuff was one of the coolest aspects of the story, and then they drifted so far away from it. Apparently the Boy King found a long-lost brother that just kind of shoehorned its way in. He started hanging out with the regular people. The Giant became less of a feature, and I think that might have actually been one of the reasons that the story ended. We wanted to see the Giant. The Boy King was just another prepubescent, non-powered superhero. We wanted the Giant. We got less of him, and I think that might have been what killed the storyline. Let's go ahead and get into
The Boy King and the Awesome Giant.
Yes, The Boy King and His Giant. The Boy King and His Giant is a request from Bucky749. Go ahead and give his channel a look. You might like the reviews that he does. You can also send in a request for a hero that you'd like to see that I can put on this format. Let's get started. Boy King and His Giant. Real name, David of Sri Lanka. I may have pronounced that wrong. I'm not good with foreign country names. And His Giant. First appeared in Clue Comics number 1 in 1943. The original publisher was Hillman, and he was created by Charles Brio, Bob Wood, and Alan Mondale. The Boy King was interesting. He had control of a giant. I do believe it was a giant mechanical man, and the stories where the Giant was as much of the character as the Boy King were actually interesting stories. There were things that you could do with the Giant that you just couldn't do with other superheroes. Unfortunately, the Giant became less of a feature as the story went on. I mean, at first it seemed like the Giant was just as integral to the story as the Boy King was, but the Giant became less pronounced as the stories went on. It became more of the Boy King story, and that had been done. I mean, prepubescent superheroes, prepubescent heroes with no powers being able to solve the day in only the ways he can had been done all throughout the Golden Age. The Giant hadn't been done before. I mean, size-changing superheroes has always been a feature ever since the Green Giant, which I covered in an earlier video. But just having this Giant was so much fun, especially when he wrestled a giant mechanical T-Rex. That was awesome. And it all went downhill from there. Apparently, David found his twin brother that was never mentioned until he was just suddenly there. And then he started hanging out with the group of kids around Hell's Kitchen, which, if you're in New York, it's always going to involve Hell's Kitchen in some way. They called themselves the Hell's Angels, which I hope the Hell's Angels never find, the biker gang never find out about that. But I don't think they were trying to... I think it was just because they were kids in Hell's Kitchen. They called themselves the Hell's Angels. I don't know. It was interesting. He did have a couple of kind of arch nemesis, Dr. Plasma, Paris, Hitler's Rex, and the Crane. They were all parts of it. So he did have a couple of arch nemesis. I believe a couple of them died. But yeah, after the Giant became a secondary feature in the comic books, the stories weren't nearly as compelling because we wanted to see the Giant. And it wouldn't have been hard to write storylines where the Giant needed to be the focal point. So let's go ahead and review the first issue. We'll cover some of the things the Giant did and what I think eventually led to the cancellation of the story after 9 issues. I mean, how could a Giant fail after 9 issues? Well, you'll find out. At the beginning of the story, it says Boy King and his Giant, and they start mentioning great men throughout history. David beating Goliath, Richard the Lionheart, Lord Wellington, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington. And with these great men, they put the Boy King. Tyrants are criminals, and like crime, they may appear anywhere. Tyrants destroy all that is good. If you stand in their way, you will be struck down. That is, unless you are made of stuff. That is the Boy King. And in the opener, we get a map here, and it says, in every case, as history proves, a tyrant's rule is short-lived, because, like heaven sent, there always appears a leader of great courage, one who knows that you must fight fire with fire. And now, when half of the world is aflame with hate and terror, the oppressed are looking for such a leader. Our story opens in a small Nazi-surrounded country of Sri Lanka. And as we see, Sri Lanka is controlled by a king and queen, and the people of the town are happy and because they actually enjoy their king because he is fair and just. Now, the next page will show us that there are Nazi airplanes that start to fly over the village, and one of these girls says, "Why did the dancing stop? Nazi planes have flown over our country before." And the other girl said, "Something is wrong. I can feel it in the air." Just then, bombs start dropping from the sky, and we see the Nazis that start to invade the country with tanks and motorcycles. Then a Nazi general comes in. He calls himself Kraus. And he puts up new orders for the residents because he's taking over. It says, official bulletin, important, at 11 o'clock in the forenoon, all Sri Lankan subjects are commanded to be present at Capitol Square. They hear the message of brotherly love and protective friendliness given to you by your new leader, Governor Grouse. It is forbidden to speak unkindly of the Fuhrer, and penalty of this is death. Yeah, that's really brotherly love. Now, as he's trying to round up the citizens, he takes the king and queen, has an audience before him, and says, we're going to go ahead and kill you all, and I take over the country. And the king tries to plead for his family, but the governor, the new Governor Grouse, the Nazi general, isn't having any of it. Now, as he starts to assassinate the royal family and those close to him, he commands that the people say, "Hail Hitler." Stoic in their resolve, they refuse to say it. He gives them to the count of 3. They still refuse, and he guns down all the citizens who are gathered in the square and refuse to say Hail Hitler. you gotta respect these people. They're not gonna just cow down to tyranny. Of course, it does result in their death, unfortunately. In the next panel, we see a guy, and he is, let's see, I guess he's a cart runner, and he is terribly sad that the whole royalty has been killed because the king was a good king. They do have those in the annals of history. And as he starts to drop the bodies at the burial site, he notices that the boy king is actually not dead, and he runs to grab a nearby physician. They start to nurse the boy king, and he actually recovers from his wounds, and they notice that the king is not actually dead either. Now, the king is on death's doorstep, and there is no way to save him. His wounds are too severe. With his last surviving breath, he gives a gigantic exposition dump. I mean, look at the last two word bubbles of this page. This is all the king speaking. It is a giant exposition dump. So he tells the boy king about the giant, how to activate him, and that he was built by Nostradamus. Yeah, he does all this while on death's door. Most people can barely get 2 words out when they're this close to death's doorstep. He gives a massive backstory. Okay, then he finally passes away, and there is a Nazi soldier on the outskirts of the burial grounds, and he tells the boy king to run, and they'll delay the Nazi. As the Nazi shows up, the two lie and say, hey, there was a boy trying to steal the bodies, and the Nazi's like, oh yeah, well, Grouse will hear about this. So the boy king goes to the place where his father said to dig at, and he starts to dig this he finds a giant nose first. And then I don't know how long he was at this, but with the size of this giant, he had to have been digging for several days. But it doesn't even give us the amount of time. It doesn't say days later or weeks later. There's no explanation of how long he was here or how he kept fed this entire time. But he digs up the giant, puts the screw in and says, oh, it's been buried for far too long, it won't work. And as he starts to walk away, the ground rumbles and trembles, and the giant suddenly stands up, and the giant seems to vary in size from panel to panel. I mean, in this first panel, when the boy king is standing next to him, he seems to be up above the giant's ankle arches, but then he gets hoisted onto the shoulder, and it looks like he can ride in the ear of the giant. So the giant size does seem to vary from time to time. Now, he rides the giant back in town. They save one of the guys who saved his life, but he couldn't save them both. And the giant starts to make short work of the Nazi army that has invaded the town. He starts destroying tanks. He grabs Grouse and squeezes him to death, and basically just frees the entire town. And then he decides that he's going to go to America, and the elderly people that are in the town will stay. He tells the elderly people, in America, my people will be safe. You will find freedom and justice for all, and we, a tiny nation, shall join them in freeing the world from oppression and tyranny. Now, it sounds like the boy king is going to go to America and help fight the Nazis on the front line. News flash. It doesn't happen. He goes to America, and he stays in America. The storylines start to get less compelling as it goes. Well, he does fight the giant mechanical T-Rex. Let's get into that. Now, the first 4 issues are rather interesting stories. The giant and the boy king are both the focal point. In the second issue, they see that as they're trying to flee to America, the Germans are following them, and the Boy King has the Giant basically fight back. At one point, he grabs torpedoes, he makes a wave to knock other torpedoes back, picking up submarines, battleships, and destroying them. I mean, it is awesome. And then, coming near the end, we see him momentarily make out with the Statue of Liberty, which is one of the funniest things I've seen. Funny that wasn't stupid, because it was just odd. So he makes out with the Statue of Liberty momentarily. They show that he's really too big for the city, so he goes to Central Park, where, he rips up a couple of trees so he's big enough, because he's so big he needs to lie down somewhere. They show an arch nemesis who momentarily takes control of the Giant, and the Boy King gets control back, and then they fight a giant mechanical T-Rex. I mean, these were some great stories to come out with, and it made for a very compelling read, and I enjoyed it. And that's when it starts to devolve down into something else. The Giant still does some amazing feats, but it's so very rare in the comic. The Boy King finds his twin brother, teams up with a whole bunch of, I guess we'll call them ruffians. They stop the gangster who kidnapped the Boy King's brother, and they pretty much just start doing random things in Hell's Kitchen, have a couple of enemies, and take them down, and the Giant becomes a back feature, and I tuned in for the Giant. I wanted to see the Giant. I didn't want to see the Boy King doing his stuff. If I wanted to see boys fighting crimes on their own, they were better stories to read. So, once the Giant became a back feature, I think the stories started becoming less compelling. I mean, shoot, he fought a giant mechanical T-Rex. If that's the story you can go with, there were so many more stories that you could have done along these lines that could have been so much better. I mean, you have him picking up submarines, battleships. How is it that you couldn't keep making storylines based on that? You said you wanted to help fight the Nazis. At no point do you help out the armed forces in taking down the Nazi army, which would have been an awesome storyline to see the Giant just sweeping through the Nazis. And at no point did it seem like he tried to wrestle back control and regain the kingdom that he lost. I mean, he freed the German occupation, but as soon as he leaves, the Nazis are going to come right back. So there was so much stuff that they can do. I think, I don't know why they switched the focal point of the comics. It really became a lot less compelling after that. So the first couple of issues, you knocked it out of the park, and then you just backtracked majorly after that. So, good start, slog to the finish, still fun read. Now, the Boy King and the Giant in Project Superpowers had a pretty significant role. The Giant was needed to take out a couple of the big bads, and not wanting to give up some, not wanting to be a spoiler for the storyline, which if you haven't read it yet, go ahead and do it. He is needed to take down some of the big bads, and the Boy King is pretty much as important because he's the one who controls the Giant, which a good part of the origin is explained in his early comic books. I don't want to spoil too much. He is as important as he is needed to be the heavy hitter. It's not the Boy King and the Giant story, yet they need the heavy hitter from a Giant that he provides. Like I said, I'm going to review Star Trek Superpowers one of these days, so I'm not going to spoil it here if you still want a chance to read it before I do a giant spoiler of it. So, go ahead and give that a read. I like the way the Giant is featured in this. They don't make him back up to the Boy King. They're both integral to the story, which is what the original stories of the Boy King and his Giant should have been. Well, I hope you liked this video. I hope this shows you that I'm willing to do requests if you've got something that you want to see. I really enjoyed doing this one. I think it was really disappointing that the Giant became less of a feature into the story. But until next time, I got more requests on the way. So until next time, I'll be seeing you.